America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great strong land of love, where never kings connive, nor tyrants scheme that any man be crushed by one above. It never was America to me. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark? And who are you that draws your veil across the stars? I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery's scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. I am the young man, full of strength and hope, tangled in that ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, of grab the land, of grab the gold, of grab the ways of satisfying need, of work the men, of take the pay, of owning everything for one's own greed. I am the farmer, bondsman to the soil. I am the worker, soul to machine. I am the Negro, servant to you all. I am the people, humble, hungry, mean, hungry yet today despite the dream, beaten yet today. Oh pioneers, I am the man who never got ahead, the poorest worker bartered through the years. Yet I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream in the old world, while still a serf of kings who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true, that even yet its mighty daring sings in every brick and stone and every furrow turned that's made America the land it has become. Oh, I'm the man who sailed those early seas in search of what I meant to be my home. For I'm the one who left dark Ireland's shore and Poland's plain and England's grassy lea, and torn from black Africa's strand I came to build a homeland of the free. The free? Who said the free? Not me. Surely not me. The millions on relief today? The millions shot down when we strike? The millions who have nothing for our pay? For all the dreams we've dreamed and all the songs we've sung and all the hopes we've held and all the flags we've hung, the millions who have nothing for our pay except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain must bring back our mighty dream again. Sure, call me any ugly name you choose, the steel of freedom does not stain. From those who live like leeches on the people's lives, we must take back our land again, America. Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me. And yet, I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we, the people, must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again.
Good morning. It's good to see this crowd. I know we still got some folks coming in after the snowstorm, so we'll keep adding folks and welcome them to The Gathering. I always get choked up with that film. You could see why when Monique and I saw it at Ideas Festival, we said we have to have that with you all because, let's face it, America never was America to opportunity youth, right? For many of us, America never was America to me. And the work that we do together is about creating the America that Langston Hughes speaks of in this poem, written almost 80 years ago to the day, if you can imagine that. How poignant is that message in the moment we're in? And it reminds me of when we were together in Boston, and we wanted to emphasize the moment we're in with this network, with the communities and young people we work with, as it relates to the sense of belonging that's so important for folks to get on a path to opportunity in our country. And we talked a lot about if you're not creating a sense of belonging, which we know is society's most important role, then you're actually othering. And it's in that moment of intense othering that we gather again here in Aspen for the OYIF. Othering of immigrants, othering of young people who might have avoided the school-to-prison pipeline but seem to be pushed back into it by policy change in recent months. How do we transcend that so that we can collectively make America, America again? This is the work of the OYIF. So welcome, and let's get back to work. For many of you, you know me. You already suffer from Steve fatigue. You know me too well. But I'm Steve Patrick, and I have the great privilege of being the executive director of the Forum for Community Solutions. And I want to welcome everyone to this table, especially new folks. You know, if you haven't been here before, I've had to say this before, bear with us. You know, it seems a little weird at times, almost cult-like. You don't have to hug everyone, you know. That only happens after you've come a few times to the network meetings. But we welcome all of you. Especially want to give a shout out and welcome 3 young people who are international participants this year. So we have 3 young people representing Brazil and Mexico over in the back. Guys, thank you for being here. We welcome you to the conversation. Let me just say a couple things. One is, it does feel like a family reunion, but I had a moment of self-awareness, which many of you know is not a common theme with me. Last night, when the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund took over the J Bar at the Hotel Jerome, and I just went in to tell a bunch of community leaders that the last shuttle was leaving for Meadows, and I got shouted out of the J Bar. And so I realized not only is it a family reunion, but it turns out I think I might be the crazy uncle. I had no idea. I hadn't realized it. So I just want to give a shout out to those folks who stood up for their right to stay till last call at the J Bar. Funny, I don't see too many of them in the room this morning. Just a couple. On a more serious note, I do think, you know, one thing I just wanted to mention before we jump into what is going to be an awesome couple of conversations is we are at an inflection point with the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund. In fact, we're going to start calling it the Opportunity Youth Forum. Many of you know I have kind of hated the incentive fund name because I never quite knew what it meant, and it's funny to work on it for 4 years in that context. But part of that is about growing the movement and the network. Part of it is about thinking about next steps as we really move towards rigor. I've stood up here before and talked about the importance of data-driven approaches. You know, there's nothing like that Hughes poem that reminds us of our privilege and our responsibility to get to impact in this work when we sit in a place like Aspen. And we recognize how fortunate we are. If you're in this room, you have the privilege and responsibility to drive towards impact. And so I'm excited about the next phase. You all know we've rolled out multiple RFPs across the communities, and we're, moving towards a real reduction in the number of opportunity youth in our country, and it's kind of extraordinary. So if we're at this inflection point, if we're able to grow the network at the same time that we go deep on the kinds of pathways and multiple pathways at scale in place strategies that you all work on, we have to sort of take your feedback. We have to do that in a co-creating, co-design kind of way. And in many ways, we don't want to do it by making new mistakes. We want to learn from other networks, folks who have been at it for a while. And so this is a moment where, rather than talk about best practice out there, for several of the gatherings, including this plenary, we want to talk about what we want to do together going forward and what can we learn from others who have really laid the groundwork for us. People like Karen Pittman and Jeff Edmondson, who, without them, we wouldn't understand what it means to have a networked approach to comprehensive community change, period. And so that's been part of what we've been thinking about in the design for these sessions is how do we, Karen says I'm allowed to call her the godmother of the positive youth development movement. So how do we learn from the godmothers and Grandpa Jeff? And what can we take from those networks that are more mature, that have been at it longer? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And then we want to ask you guys to give us lots of input. I know you will not be shy. I was at the J Bar last night. I got plenty of input. But we want your input as we think about this transition in this moment. So I welcome you all. I encourage you all to step into this. For those of you who have not been with us, I always say kind of embrace the irony of talking about equity and opportunity and justice in a place like Aspen. Honor the Ute people who discovered this place long before the billionaire tribe discovered this place. And have a great time. Take something home. Let's work together. And we're going to have a packed, Monique Miles, we're going to have a packed couple of days. But it's always exciting that most folks just keep coming back for more and keep voting with their feet. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over now to Melody Barnes, the chair. And, you guys know how great Mel is. She's the best damn leader I've ever worked with, period. And Mel's going to kick this conversation off, and then we'll transition to a conversation where Doug Wood will caffeinate and interview Jeff Edmondson, and we'll give Jeff a chance to share some lessons learned from the Strive Together network. So without me continuing to ramble on, Melody Barnes, everybody.
Well, good morning, everyone. You know that moment after the crazy uncle tells you what he really thinks? There is that moment of reflection. So after Steve's wonderful introduction and that great poem, we are so pleased to have with us in this opening session that we talked about and characterized as one on head and heart, to have with us Karen Pittman. And Karen is, again, one of those people that really doesn't need an introduction. But for those of you who don't know her, her career has crisscrossed both the nation and any number of sectors, as well as some iconic institutions that are really critical to our field and to our work. And Karen has been in research at the Urban Institute. Mm-hmm. She is an author. She has been in government at the highest levels in the Clinton administration. You also launched some important institutions, America's Promise with General Colin Powell, obviously the Forum for Youth Investment, And yeah, got a little shout out on that one. And because of that, we wanted to bring Karen up to talk to us about her work, about the forum, and about, as Steve was saying, this issue of networks and movements as we think about the transition that we're undergoing with all of you and the journey that we've been taking for the last 5 years and what it looks like as we go forward. So Karen, thank you for making it to Aspen. As we've said, you know, you have to want to get to Aspen. So thank you for being here.
I am glad I got here.
So I thought we'd start out with you just describing, for those who may not know, a little bit about the Forum for Youth Investment and what your focus has been and kind of what some of the key elements have been for the forum.
Sure. And I will try to be very brief in all these. You can ask me more questions. So the Forum for Youth Investment was started calculate it right, 1998, co-founded with Marita Irby, who was with me at the previous organization, the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research. And so I founded that organization in 1990 after leaving the Children's Defense Fund because I wanted to figure out, I was challenged, frankly, by Marian Wright Edelman to go see if we could make youth development a thing. So when I was at CDF and we were talking about the fact that when we would go to the Hill, all we were doing was talking about how to get more funding for programs that all had a problem orientation for teenagers. So juvenile justice, child welfare, et cetera. And I said, there's got to be something more than this. I had the privilege of doing the adolescent pregnancy work at CDF, which wasn't legislative focused, it was community focused. And when I went out into communities to talk to them about what they were doing to help young people prevent pregnancy and then later prevent dropout, prevent HIV, what they were talking about was creating these places where young people could come and feel safe and feel supportive and feel understood and then get the services that they needed. But they weren't leading with the services. And they were annoyed by the fact that they had to change their shingle every couple years. So the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research was set up to basically see if we could figure out how to inject into the public discourse a conversation about young people as assets. And we got that plate spinning, and then sort of went off to America's Promise and the International Youth Foundation. Shout out to the folks in the back of the room to make sure that we have an international perspective in this work, which is very important. And the Forum for Youth Investment was set up to take it to the next level, to figure out how we really could get to a set of allied youth fields across the systems and sectors that really all had at their heart this understanding of young people as assets and the need to make sure that young people are well connected in their communities to multiple places where they can spend their time and feel supported. And then obviously we then have to make sure that there are policies and processes in place to do that. So that's really been the undergirding of the forum's work. Our tagline is moving ideas to impact. We've been doing that slowly but steadily. So I would say we sort of started out more in typical think tank mode and moved ourselves towards what we call an action tank, where we actually have legs that hit the ground to work with different audiences, focusing on creating these local partnerships or state partnerships or coalitions or coordinating bodies, whatever we want to call them, that are really trying to get that alignment happening locally to support young people. Along the way, we have created or adopted many things. So the forum is sort of a house of brands. You may know us through the Spark Action Door. You may know us through the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality Door. You may know us through the Children's Cabinet Network Door, or more recently, the Children's Funding Project Door. You know us through the Performance Partnerships pilots and the work that Thaddeus has been doing around policy alignment. So we have all of those pieces that have come together, but the idea was we created them when the demand was there. And that's really been the signature, I think, of the forum and what's made it successful. A little erratic, but we're here because we really try to respond to what we see the demand being and the gaps being in the communities, and we're not afraid to fail, and we have failed, but that's a different conversation.
I want to come back in a second to the positive youth narrative piece of this that you mentioned, but I want to stay for a second on a discussion about the networks. You talked about these different doors that people may know your work through, and that's working in 3D. And it's complex, but it's necessary. I mean, because that's the way life often looks. And I'm wondering, and I think this is really critical to the work that we are all doing and this journey that we're about to embark on as we deepen our focus on networks and movements. If you could talk about what critical elements you've seen as a result of these multifaceted doors that people could enter, about what makes a network particularly effective. What are the key elements that you would articulate based on your experience?
Well, I would say the common denominator in the networks that we run, and they're varying kinds, from networks that are really focused very deliberately on sort of improving programs and really all about data and continuous improvement and helping people build these systems, to networks that are much more amorphous, like the Ready by 21 Leadership Network at the broadest level is really a network of leaders who are committed to this whole child, whole community sort of asset building approach and committed to building partnerships. But I think what has made all of these grow, as they have grown, is that we've started first by listening. We haven't assumed that we were starting to build a network. We started by listening to people who were doing stuff, and then taking advantage of the fact that we got to listen in multiple places, multiple times, and we're good at finding the common denominator. So when you would see threads that you could pull across conversations, we would find a little money and bring those people together and say, is this actually a thread that's worth working on? And they would start to work on it. And if there were things that were more efficient for us to do than for them to do, we would start to do those. Sometimes that grew into sophisticated measurement processes. Sometimes it grew into a policy space where you're doing policy advocacy. But I think that really, for us, has been the essence of what's made the networks that we've done successful. I would say the other thing about most of the networks that we have done that has lasted, and this is not to say that money is a bad thing, but they've actually started not because we had money to hand people, but because we had money to meet people and find out what they needed, and then had a little bit of money to bring them together. There certainly are many wonderful and powerful networks, and we have run some initiatives that started with giving out grant money, but what that does is it sort of puts it softens the voice to say you're wasting our time. And I think the most important thing we have to do if we're managing networks of busy people who have lots of things to do is to make sure that we're always giving them room to say, this is not worth my time. You've overstretched what you know. Don't bring us that anymore.
And that last comment, and this also ties back, I think, to your comment about finding that thread and giving people an opportunity to say, I think this is something worth pursuing. What happens and what advice would you give to us if we're pursuing that and there are resources there to pursue a particular issue or challenge, and then there's disagreement about whether or not it's working? And some say this is something that we should continue to work on, and others saying, no, this isn't quite right. I mean, how have you, in other words, handled those kinds of differences of opinion and conflicts that inevitably will occur?
Transparently would be the easiest answer. I think if you don't have those disagreements, people aren't being honest with you. So I think you have to go into this assuming that if you've brought together any kind of group that has any kind of diversity in it, from the size of the communities or the nature of what they're doing, or even just the people that they've gathered around the table, because by definition, these partnerships are always slightly different and in different contexts. Everything isn't going to work everywhere. And if you start with that as the common opening statement, everything isn't going to work everywhere. You know, if you sort of fail forward is going to be our motto. You know, we're going to be lucky if half of the things that we suggest work. So we want to know which half, and then pull those together. And the ones that don't work, we want to know why they don't work. I think as long as we're, the thing I think that has made the networks that we have, that have lasted the longest, the most powerful, is that they start with powerful frames before they start to fill in the frames. So if you give people reasons to come together, that they actually can own those ideas and take those ideas home and play with them themselves, before you start to hand, it's not that we shouldn't hand them tools and guides and resources and all kinds of things to make it more efficient, but where we have failed, and we have failed, we've gotten ahead of ourselves, and we've made the tools before the people had time to test out the ideas.
So the tail has been
The
wagging
tail
the
has been, if the tail wags the dog is eventually going to bite you.
Nice. And related to that, you were talking about resources for a second, and you're right, it was interesting. I remember 5 years ago when we were all underway, the conversations we had with people, because the resources at that time were not significant. It wasn't as though, there were trucks of money that, we were unloading, but people also responded to, and I think transparently and very honestly, about the process of coming together and engaging being an important one, and the technical assistance and those elements being important, so it not just being the cash. But at the same time, we know resources are important. We're at a moment where resources are shifting in some places, and I'm speaking broadly, externally, nationally, and shifting, in some cases drying up. And based on your experience, again, the advice that you would give us and give communities as they're thinking about deepening their work, deepening the collaboration, continuing the momentum, and at the same time dealing with the shifting sands under their feet, our feet, with regard to resources.
Yeah, let's talk about two kinds of resources, because both are critical. If you're going to sort of follow this idea of identifying and figuring out how to bring people together who are doing like things so that they can leverage what they're doing, you need resources. If the time is right for bringing folks together, and clearly the time is right for bringing this group together, there's no doubt about it. I've read the second-year evaluation report, both impressive findings and really a well-done evaluation report, and I read a lot of them, so kudos to the folks at Equal Measure who wrote it. You need resources to do that. And as you said, those resources can be technical assistance. Clearly, the networking opportunities are critical in this, the things that go in between the face-to-face meetings, and those sort of flexible dollars that allow folks to do what they need to do to get started. All of those are really essential, and anybody that just offers one tends to not get as far. The main thing from that perspective is to not have, in any of those categories, the things that you offer be either so big or so well-defined in terms of how they're supposed to be used that people basically don't have room to be honest with you. So it's not.
I hear you consistently talking about the importance of that space
Yeah.
To evolve, to fill in the frame, to
Yeah.
create the frame, to
Yeah.
fill it in.
Let me just give you an easy example,
Please.
and this is not from the Opportunity Youth space, but we've just been working with a funder who sort of decided, and I think it was a good thing to decide, that in these shifting policy times, we needed an opportunity for youth development organizations, so we're talking about youth development, to actually sort of come together and figure out how to have a stronger policy agenda, so that if they can either maintain or increase their share of what's going to be a shrinking pot of money in most people's estimation. Good idea, right? Good idea. But they had a pretty diverse group of grantees, from big national organizations to organizations that focused on specialized things like coaching or outdoor education, et cetera. And so they pulled these folks together. The folks all nodded and said, yes, this is a great idea. There were 6 months of meetings about, they hired us at another organization to facilitate these conversations. You could tell immediately that this wasn't going to work.
Because?
Because we weren't allowed to let people find their own space inside of this conversation. So because they were being driven to consensus, what is our consensus agenda? And there really wasn't enough consensus. It's not that there was disagreement, but everybody doesn't use the 21st Century Learning Center's dollars. So if that's going to be at the top of the list, some people are going to think, well, that doesn't help me. And that conversation wasn't allowed to happen. So people politely had their staff politely show up for 6 months at these meetings. And then when you all come together to look at the policy agenda, nobody's enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
That's a waste of time.
I've been on the
You've
other
been in that,
side
yeah.
of that when funders have said, we want to bring a group together, we've
Right.
got a big problem, help coordinate this effort. And you're right, there's no disagreement, but there's not real
Right.
agreement.
Or you can go on the technical assistance side.
Yeah.
And we have done this. So I'll tell you things that we're guilty of. We've identified, started, or participated in lots of things that have been wrong. But the idea that because this is a big project and because we want it to work, that we need to really fill those frames in early for people. We need to say, you need data, and this is the kind of data you need to have. You need this, and this is what you're going to do. And you're moving into a space in which we haven't tested those ideas enough. It's not that they're bad ideas, they just haven't been road tested enough to put them out there as the things that everybody should be doing. Mm-hmm. And we don't put enough, if it's useful, if it works for you, you don't have to around it. And so you always have that power dynamic that you have to watch. And luckily, we never get enough money to be that powerful. But other folks, can be in that space, and we need to watch out for it.
Two more questions before I open this up to the audience to engage. One of the things that you have focused on throughout your career that has been, I think, absolutely essential is a narrative shift from deficit to positive youth development. And certainly the Opportunity Youth Movement Network, the work that we do, sits on that foundation. And I'm curious what you think, given where we are right now, what we could and should be doing with Opportunity Youth, with youth leaders at the forefront to continue to shift that narrative. I mean, we're preaching to the choir in this room, and they're concentric circles out. We're preaching to the choir, but we still haven't gotten where we need to be.
I mean, the one-word answer is more. Mm-hmm. The two-word answer is much more that we need to be doing, and need to be doing to put young people in the front. Mm-hmm. They are the most powerful change agents that we can have for moving this conversation forward. When we talk about positive youth development at this point in time, people may not remember that it actually really comes out of two old movements that were focused on these young people. It comes out of the settlement house movement, and it comes out of alternative youth, which is back at the turn of the century, and alternative youth services in the 60s, where we really wanted a different approach to runaway and homeless youth, to really sort of backing that process up and doing something that we can talk about in a minute, which is really making sure that when we're working with young people who have been marginalized, we are providing not just services, we're providing supports, we're providing opportunities, but we're also providing sort of almost spiritual sustenance. We've got to make sure that we bring healing into these conversations, and we're open and honest about the fact that we have done a major injustice to these young people as a country. So the positive youth development space started there. More recently, it's gotten, two things have happened. One, it's really gotten institutionalized into policy. We've got an interagency working group that has a probably too long statement about what positive youth development is, that cuts across all the agencies and moves down in terms of language. And we have a positive youth development movement that's really been, in some ways, used to fuel the after-school conversation and fuel the more recent conversation about social and emotional learning and social and emotional development. So it's there, but we still have a long ways to go. And we have a long ways to go, especially when we're coming up against very embedded frames that essentially, and perceptions, and the work that we probably need to, if there are funders in the room, we probably need to fund frameworks to do something specifically on Opportunity Youth, to really, have we done that yet? Okay, good. Think about that. To really tackle head on the fact that this country still thinks adolescents are, sort of bundles of problems, and it thinks adolescents that have already had visible problems that they can see because they're unemployed, because they're a teen parent, because they're coming out of foster care or juvenile justice. How we tackle that frame is important. So we need to put young people front and center, but we need to put them front and center in a way that they are presenting themselves as folks who have come with problems and with solutions, and obviously with the need for opportunities and the need to be seen as assets. And what we have is clearly increasing evidence that not only can these young people be assets, these young people are already assets, but those assets are hidden. And if we have a minute when we talk, I'll give you an example of that. That's real research that I think is very powerful in ways that we can help young people have these conversations with their communities. So What else can I talk to you about?
So, one
I know our
last
time's
thing.
gonna be- she's going to put a sign up in a minute.
Yes, I
feel
know,
it.
I know. But if we avert our eyes, we won't be able to see that. Just joking, because I can see Monique. So the question, where does it hurt? And Steve commented, and I was having the same reaction watching
Yes.
the narration of the poem. And I read your blog post on this. If you all haven't seen it, please, I commend it to you. And you referred back to the conversation that you heard between Ruby Sales, the civil rights leader, and Krista Tippett. And I took your advice and I listened
Good.
to that. And asking the question, where does it hurt? Which is a very basic question, but it in so many ways is the most critical question, both for individuals and for communities. And you go on in your blog post to talk about the healing that is necessary, because America has never been America. And I'm curious about your reflections on the act of healing, which you referenced in your last answer, in the context of the work that we're doing. Because this is head and heart work. I mean, all the work we do around data and metrics, all that is important, but it has to be infused with, tethered to the work of the heart, and this act of healing wounds that have been open literally for hundreds of years.
Yeah. Well, the interview with Ruby Sales was actually done, I think, about 2 years ago, but it was rebroadcast shortly after Charlottesville, and I was listening one Sunday morning. And it was the first thing for me that I had heard, and obviously there had been lots of things in the media. It was the first thing that I had heard that actually gave me a different way to think about how we work our way out of this problem. And you should listen to it. You read the blog if you want, but listen to the interview. It's really quite amazing. Ruby talks about, she basically talks about black folk religion, and which is essentially the religion of the people that was created in slavery to make sure that even when on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, blacks walked into situations in which they had no value, or they only had a monetary value, when they came home, they were coming home to a community in which they could feel value, they could feel that they had not only a value in that community, but that they had a place in the world. And that this is really what fueled daily, on a daily basis, the healing that had to happen in slavery, and also fueled the civil rights movement. And she would argue has fueled most of the movements in this country are coming out of this. And the basic thing is that it talks about love. So Ruby says so many powerful things, but one of the things that she says is that, outrage is fine. Outrage and anger are fine, but there are two kinds of anger. There's redemptive anger and there's non-redemptive anger. And redemptive anger basically is anger that sets you out to make things better. And non-redemptive anger is anger like white supremacy that just sort of basically makes you want to tear things down. And that we've got to not equate those and see them that way. So she said so many things, it's hard to summarize, but the two things that she said that came across as very powerful to me, one was, we have to think about where it hurts for white Americans who are feeling threatened. And her basic answer was, it's not just about money. It's really about the fact, and the loss of jobs, and the loss of stability. It's about the fact that whiteness in this country doesn't get you what it used to. And that loss of a basic identity, that even if you were struggling, et cetera, said you were better than someone else, they have to have a new frame. They have to have a new theology. And somebody has to bring that. And the sentence that struck me was, she said, as a black American, I'm waiting for somebody to bring that theology into white communities so that we can all start this healing process together. The second thing that she said that was extremely powerful and I think relevant for this conversation is that in the civil rights movement, when you listen, and I know we all have, when we listen to Martin Luther King's speeches, he was talking about getting to we. He was talking about getting to a place of unity where we could really have these redemptive conversations. And that the moment in time when the civil rights movement lost that depth and became about integration and economic parity and things like that, which were all important, that we essentially sent our children out unprepared. We sent them out to integrate into a world that wasn't going to accept them, and we also, at the same time, were losing that black sort of base to bring them back home and heal them. So we have a generation or more generations of young people who basically have been sent out to do the hard work and almost the impossible work of making people love them. And we haven't been bringing them back home and telling them that they were loved. And so what I'd like to do is to, when I thought about this, and Thad reminded me, is when we think about what Opportunity Youth United has done and their principles for action start with love. And the words are love, responsibility, community empowerment, forgiveness and empathy, inclusion, visibility, collaboration, accountability for results, respect for faith, humanity, and last but important, planning. And I just want to celebrate the fact that young people are telling us in their own words, this is not just about the technical things that we have to do to move from, and I love the pyramid that you all use, to move from those sort of individual relationships up into organizational relationships and planning and policy. All those things are important, but we have got to lead with love, and we have got to let our young people shine and show us that they are the assets and that they are ready to take on the responsibilities, not only of healing themselves, but healing our communities.
And with that, I open it to you for questions. I know it's early. Coffee hasn't quite kicked in, but anyone have any questions for Karen? That one right here. I'm sorry?
I can do the list one more time, but do you all have the, are the Opportunity Youth United pieces, are they in the back of the room?
We have hard copies and we will fax them.
Tell them that.
We have hard copies and you can see myself and the on the model and the curriculum as well.
And there is a question here. Oh, hold on one second. The microphone's coming to you so we can record and hear. Everyone can hear you. And give us your name and where you're from.
Good morning, Joyce McClellan, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where it's 80 degrees. I had a quick question. I may have missed it, but I am so interested in looking for the Ruby post that you mentioned.
Yes.
Would you tell us a little bit more about that so we can write it down?
Yeah, it's called Why Does It Hurt? I have a HuffPost column, so if you just type in Karen Pittman HuffPost, or you can go to the forum's website, multiple ways to get it, but Karen Pittman HuffPost, and it's the most recent post, I think.
And we just retweeted that post from the Aspen Twitter account, so if you go to our Aspen Twitter, you can see it directly.
Great.
Any other questions before we shift to our next fantastic panelist? I see a question, actually, two in the very back. And then we'll shift to our next.
Good morning, Amanda Burks and Shokak from Philadelphia. Thank you so much. My question is about power and vulnerability. My experience in the last 20 years of working in foundation-funded work is that nothing scares funders more than the idea of being vulnerable in public. And I'm wondering what the powerful words that you shared about love and healing have to tell us about how to shift the power dynamic that really drives the fact that so many young people get a very small slice of the stage for a very limited amount of time, as opposed to being centered in this work.
I'm trying to hear the question in that. I agree with the statement. just say quickly again what the question is.
You talked about your humility in terms of not assuming you knew what the answers were. I'm kind of curious to know what can we in this room do so that young people don't just get a small slice of the stage sometimes, but actually get centered in the power of the work?
We can walk the talk, and that's hard to do. I will tell you, it's hard to do, but we need to do it. So starting with funders, we need to be prepared at times to sit down and have conversations that could threaten either how much money we get or whether we get the money, but we need to be able to sit down and have those conversations. When we're sitting down and having those conversations, we need to build into it an expectation up front of how we're going to engage young people, how we're going to engage community, and what we're going to do if we hit tough issues. Your question of what happens if people don't agree. Those are hard things to do, but so far I have found that doing that in a respectful way gets respect. I'll leave it there. Is there one more question?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to thank you, one, for just your sheer beauty and honesty and the clarity with which you bring your words. And that, to me, is the answer. So that's the statement part of it. And the question is, I think all of this, as we oppress young people and as we oppress certain groups of people, it's all out of fear. And my question to you is, what is that fear?
That's a big question. I will say, honestly. I think it's a combination of fear of the unknown and a fear of the known. We always typically fear things that we don't know, but I think, unfortunately, in this country, there's a lot of things that we do know and that we're ashamed of. And we are sometimes more afraid of being in a situation in which we actually have to acknowledge that we do know what pain is happening, we do know what suffering is happening, we do know what injustices have happened, and we've known all along and we haven't done enough about it. And that's hard. All of us can do so much more, and all of us need to be challenged to do more.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Karen Pittman. Our fantastic Steve Patrick.
Fantastic is such a good word. It's a Doug Woodward. So I'm going to ask, thank you, Mel and Karen, for that awesome first conversation. We're going to I'm going to ask Doug Wood and Jeff Edmondson to join us up for the next conversation. And as they come up, I'll introduce Doug, and then Doug will introduce Jeff. So many of you know Doug as one of the first funders of the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund. He works at the Ford Foundation. You probably have heard of that place. A little bit of money. And I just want you to know a little bit more about Doug Wood. So not only is he one of the first funders of the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, and not only was he much maligned and called out from this same stage last year by Scott Budnick, among others, you'll recall. But Doug has built so many interesting things in his time at Ford. So, for example, a whole field around prison and post-prison education. That's included literally millions of dollars of public investment, transforming the California system, getting the Obama administration to reinvigorate Pell for a whole subset. Pell eligibility went away for incarcerated populations. Doug helped bring that back. He actually funded the startup of Hamilton. Can you believe that? Which is like sort of a classic Doug Wood experience where I say to him, like, hey man, we got tickets to Hamilton. He's like, oh yeah, I funded it. I was there for the rehearsals.
Exactly.
That's so Doug Wood. Doug Wood is so blessed and shares his blessings with those who are less fortunate in so many different ways. But just one other example, at the launch of My Brother's Keeper, I saw Michael Smith walk in from the Obama Foundation, MBKA. At the launch of My Brother's Keeper, who apologized to Doug Wood? President Barack Obama. Why? He stepped on Doug's foot. Like, I would do anything to have the president step on my foot. I mean, what a lucky guy. So he also, the second grant he ever made, and I may be stealing from his introduction, was to an extraordinary network that really put the cradle to career continuum on the map and really invigorated a sense of collective impact, shared accountability across multiple systems. And he funded this sort of dynamic, unbelievably entrepreneurial, award-winning, younger than I am, full head of hair, amazing leader, named Jeff Edmondson, who started that work in Cincinnati, and now you know it as the Strive Together Network, which has really been at the forefront of this kind of collaborative approach to change. And so it's really a privilege to have Doug here. These guys are very close in this conversation. We just thought it would be great to connect the two of them in front of you all. They have a little reunion, and you get to witness it. And ask Doug to introduce Jeff. The last thing I'll say about all this work that Doug has done at Ford, he's also done it while being a part-time resident of the south of France, where it is also warmer than it is in Aspen State. So he's an amazing guy. He's an amazing leader. We're very fortunate to have him here, and we're very fortunate to have him interview the remarkable Jeff Edmondson. So I'll shut up now. Doug Wood, Jeff Edmondson. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks. Wow, thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate that wonderful, gracious introduction. It is always an honor to share the stage with Jeff.
Thank you.
And you did steal my thunder on that, by the way. I remember my third day at the Ford Foundation, and Jeannie Oakes, my former director, she came to my office and she said, "You have to come upstairs. There's this great dynamic leader having a conversation and presenting to living cities." And you were in the East River room, and it was just great to see you and get to know you, and I was very honored that we were able to give a grant to Strive Together, and it was the second grant that I gave, and it has just become such a remarkable, wonderful organization. It's been great to watch the development of Strive Together and the development of you as a leader.
Well, thank you.
So you've been able to take Strive Together from being a subsidiary of KnowledgeWorks Foundation to its own 501c3, and now you're managing director of the Balmer Group. So congratulations on your journey as a leader.
Thanks.
And it's been great to watch. So I have a question. Actually, I have two questions. The first question is, as Strive Together changed over the years, how were you able to maintain data, a focus on data, quality, rigor, outcomes, and impact? That's the first question I have. And then the second question is, as this network is evolving into the next phase of their work as they hit the 5-year mark, what advice would you give them?
Wow, great questions. So I'm going to not answer either of them.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I could definitely do that. I'll start with the second one, I think. But first, I do want to just say, Doug, you were more than just watching. You were a huge part and coach and guide and all of that that has happened over the last decade. I actually wanted to offer two caveats to my thoughts here. One is that I'm treating this as a reflection/therapy session. The reflection piece being after a decade of work, unintentionally starting up a national network, following in the footsteps of Karen Pittman, learning a lot from all that she's done over the years, among others that have launched these networks. Since taking this new role, I haven't had really a chance to reflect, and this forced that. A therapy session, because I fully expect Doug to ask at least 2 or 3 questions that have nothing to do with what we're supposed to be talking about, that will invariably help me to become more enlightened, so as you always do, so I appreciate that. The second caveat here is that I want to recognize that I'm fully an interloper. It was actually great at the reception last night to walk in the room and walk around like 2 times and not know a soul. I kept looking, at first, like, where is that person that I know? And then I thought to myself, actually, this is awesome, right? That there are so many people that I don't know that are involved in this work, that are leading collective impact, and I put that in air quotes intentionally, and I can speak to that later if you want, type work. And it's just so amazing to see where the work is going. and how much incredible intentionality there is around this particular topic, of which you also invested in very early on, I know, of opportunity youth, what I would say could be the most vulnerable and also the greatest asset, untapped asset in many cases in our communities. And so I just want to recognize that I am an interloper, and no matter how much Steve, as the crazy uncle, or Monique or Melody prepared me for this, there's no way that I could understand exactly where this network is right now, right? Only the family understands that. But I was asked to come in and push a little bit, right? As an interloper, to kind of push on where are you as a network, and reflect on that a little bit. So I just want to say three things that relate to, I think, where the network's going forward, and then I can talk about the first question of where Strive Together is using data. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
So the three reflections is that as I think about networks, in the most basic of terms, there's kind of three key roles, as I see it. One, building awareness, right? Two, knowledge sharing, and three, impact, right? Its most basic level, if there were three things that networks were intended to do, I would say it would be those things: raise awareness, share knowledge, increase impact, right? And so just from an outsider's perspective, having been connected with some of you, some of the communities in the Strive Together network are also helping to lead some of the Opportunity Youth work. Having been connected to Steve and team for years, if I tick through those three real quick, as an outsider coming in, I would say on the awareness front, you're crushing it, right? Crushing it. I can tell you that I have the privilege of traveling all over the country. I know Doug does as well. And if I go into communities now, people talk about Opportunity Youth, right? People are aware of this topic. I will just say my wife teaches at a community college. She teaches first-year experience courses and developmental English. And she uses the language Opportunity Youth, even though I personally have never introduced that to her, right? She is aware of that in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the community college level. She gets it, and there is a focus on it. The youth voice work that was just outlined and that Karen went through the points, that is unparalleled in networks. I've seen nationally. I mean, it's just so incredibly important and powerful. And that portion of building awareness, you all are just way ahead of the curve, right? As I would see it, awesome, right? Just so incredible. Knowledge sharing, I would say, really incredible stuff. Every time I've talked with Monique, who really does all the work, and the crazy uncle, right? I hear about this cool new knowledge sharing opportunity or this cool new resource that's coming out that isn't produced by the staff, but is produced by communities that they are lifting up. And I really think that's the art of this work, is the network staff not doing things to network members, but network members doing amazing stuff, and then the staff understanding that, lifting it up, and disseminating it. And I feel like the opportunities that I've heard, the sessions that are here that I read through, just phenomenal. And so I feel like that piece really strong, right? And so in sort of not just these characteristics of networks, but also maybe the arc of development, usually the awareness piece comes up front, right? And then there's some family building, some mobilization, there's some energy, and then there's people that like start to really connect with each other, and that's when the knowledge sharing takes off, right? And there's all kinds of knowledge sharing. And I can tell you from having yesterday I had to take a bus from Denver to here when our flights were canceled, people are motivated to be a part of this network. And my guess is it's partly because of the knowledge sharing. It's also partly because Steve told us that the bus ride was 2.5 hours when it was really 5. But other than that, right, I think people really wanted to get here. So good data utilization there. That was good. Knowing your audience was awesome.
Never lied to a fundraiser.
You would never do that. So I think that's great. Now I'm going to push you a little bit on the third piece, and I'm rounding out here. Okay, I'm going to push a little bit on the impact piece, because I feel like all networks go through this trajectory where they're a lot about quantity. They're a lot about quantity, pushing the message, pushing the movement, if you will, and then at some point it shifts to sort of quality and impact, right? And that's really what is behind impact. And I've even heard Steve use the language in our conversations of kind of the pivot from startup to impact. And I don't know if everybody here would agree with that or not, and I can certainly tell you from reading through all the different pamphlets that were in the packet I got, there is clearly some impactful work going on in individual communities. And to borrow a term that Karen just used, there's a lot of failing forward going on as well. There's a lot of lessons that have been learned. I've heard about some of them from, again, the folks that are part of the Strive Together community. They're also part of Opportunity Youth Work. But there's a lot of failing forward that has happened. And I think there is a critical moment in every network where networks have to decide what are the outcomes we want to hold ourselves accountable for, number one. And number two, what are the true cornerstones or building blocks of success that we know really do mark quality? And the key here, again, is that the staff of the Institute can't tell the network what that is. The network has to stumble upon that and agree upon that themselves. So the biggest lesson from the Strive Together work was when the network members themselves said, we don't all have a shared definition of success, and they themselves self-organized, right, with the support of the staff as they went, self-organized to say there's 6 outcomes we're going to move. Kindergarten readiness, early grade reading, middle grade math, high school graduation, college entrance, degree completion. That's what it's going to be. They're now adding one on employment, I heard last week, right? But the network members said, we're going to hold ourselves accountable for those outcomes, and everybody collects those. That's one piece. The second piece is even more important in some ways, of what are the characteristics of quality that we all want to monitor to understand whether or not we are making progress towards improving those outcomes. And even in my unintentional focus group in the bus ride here, right, asking the question, sort of, what do you think it is that's going on here? What do you think the keys to success are? Last night, talked to a couple communities reps, talked to the evaluators. Justin Piff, thank you for your guidance and insights from Equal Measure. There were a few things that emerged right away. And that, again, as an interloper, I have no idea if these are the things. But one is, really good opportunity youth work. It sounds like opportunity youth work. It sounds like, one, the opportunity youth are fully engaged, right? One, boom. Like, if that's not happening in a community, maybe the opportunity youth work isn't necessarily as impactful as it could be and as sustainable as it would need to be, right? Number two, employers need to be engaged. Once again, as an interloper, I heard that if there's not a connection to employers, big challenge. 3, if there's not data infrastructure to actually understand what's happening with kids and as a result of the services that are being rendered, we may not be able to do a lot of improvement work. I heard that, don't know if it's true, but that definitely seemed to come up to me. 3, if there's not a lot of really good policy work going on, where there's advocacy around what works for kids and what and not just kids, but students need, youth, that is really important, right? That if we're not doing that work really, really well, then chances are this may not be sustained over the long term. But I think the challenge that I would levy, and just to throw out there about maybe going forward for this network based on my very limited understanding, and also the work of Strive Together around what they did to maintain a focus on quality, was one, is I would ask you all as network members, do you want to organize around a set of outcomes? And you have some already, but do you really want to organize around them? Do you really want to hold themselves accountable? Where you go to the homepage of your website, and those outcomes are right there at the top. Like what it is that you're going to move to make sure that everybody's having success, that they're right there. And are you willing as a network to organize and say, these are the core benchmarks of success that if you're not implementing, maybe you're not quite there. And I know that that's hard to hear, but I think it's important for a network to be able to say that there are some things that if you're not doing those things really well, that it's not really the depth of work, getting to the deep part, it's not the depth of work that we all know would be necessary in order to be successful. So I think that would be in the future where I think, if I was just to throw out my ideas on where OYF may be, would be, can we land on those outcomes, right? Can we land on those building blocks, recognizing that we have been crushing it on awareness and crushing it on knowledge exchange, right? Which is just hallmarks of successful networks that everybody in this room, as far as I can tell, has really embraced.
I want to get back to scalability, the question of scalability. Strive Together made a concerted decision at one point, I think it was a reflective moment in your development, where you decided that you were not going to expand into 3,000 communities, but that you would maintain a focus on this issue of quality, but also thinking about how do you deepen the work in particular communities, particularly, for example, the accelerator communities. We were in my hometown of Spartanburg, South Carolina, getting intimate with the data, as I like to say.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to this network about that reflection point? You know, people always push to say, okay, get bigger, get bigger, get bigger, get bigger. And we'll get to philanthropy in a moment, because that's partly philanthropy's fault. But say a little bit more about that. When's the right time to be making that decision?
So first off, what was the name of the diner that you took me to in Spartanburg?
Papa Sam's.
Papa Sam's. So let me just say to all of you, if you ever end up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, go there. He hadn't been there for like 20 years and knew the waitress, right? Like, you gotta go to a place like that. It was awesome. Yeah, that was so fun.
That was fun.
So yeah, what really happened was the network members started to come to convenings, and they were like, hey, we're hearing that communities say they're doing work. They're not really doing anything differently. They're just talking about collaboration with the new term collective impact. This is kind of driving us nuts. And there was a core group of about 12 communities that said, this isn't gonna work, and we're not gonna keep coming to these things if it's a lot of people talking and no real action against results. So that core group invited in others in the network to say, could we identify what these quality benchmarks might be of success? And over the course of 6 months, the staff helped facilitate discussions with that core group, opening the door to any community that wanted to engage along the way. And they developed what ended up being called the theory of action in their network. You can call it whatever you want. I can talk about the language stuff too, which is an area where we're struggling. But the network members themselves said, this is what quality looks like. And then they said, everybody needs to assess themselves against these benchmarks. And we need to be really honest about where we are, right? So we facilitated that, and the network went from 110 members down to 49 members, right? It cut in, below half. And those were the moments where the gray hair that I have on my head, those were those moments where it was like, I think this could fail, right? I literally think this may be gone within the next year. What happened was we ended up with a stronger network of 49 communities that were truly dedicated. And then the communities that did not end up making the cut, there were certain ones that kept going, Spartanburg being one of them, right? That just said, no. You, first off, we're going to get there. And they took it as a challenge, right? And the network is now back up to 70, I believe, right? That was, last week they had their national convening. It is funny how everything happens at the exact same time as far as these convenings go, right? Somebody needs to work on that, Doug. Can you fix that?
I can't.
You fix a lot of things.
Not that.
That could be it. But they now are up to 70, and they actually probably are going to raise the bar again. The network members have said, we think we need to go back to the drawing board, right? And it probably would mean that the network gets cut again. But the network members are making decisions about what those benchmarks are themselves. And I really believe that is the key at this juncture, where you've crushed on awareness, you're generating tons of amazing knowledge and insight, and when you get to impact, it's whether or not the network itself wants to kind of turn that curve or remain focused on awareness and knowledge management, which is awesome, and knowledge sharing, which is awesome, but that's sort of that's an evolutionary moment, a pivot, to use Steve's term, that I think everybody in this room, could reflect on a little bit and determine if that would be the direction that you all want to head.
Yeah. Well, I spoke of philanthropy. And, I consider
I think we're out of time. Is that right? Are we
not
good?
Quite.
We're not?
No,
Are you sure?
We're not there yet, Jeff.
All right.
So, yeah.
You just called me grandpa, by the way. That was a mess. I can't believe that.
Well, I'm about to call you something else.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So I sort of consider you the Yoda of place-based, community-based work.
That is, yeah.
And now you've kind of gone to the dark side. And I can say that, being in philanthropy, because philanthropy, and I mean that in this way, philanthropy can do really, really, really great, terrific, amazing things by working with people and really supporting great work. And philanthropy can do really, really bad things also, right? So speaking of it from that standpoint, and my term I always use, I've used on this stage many times, I always am so against philanthropic colonialism. And I was going to bring that up. And
we actually had a drinking game, so I think tonight one of us got to take a shot. I forget what the over-under was on that. But anyway, go ahead.
So, based on all the work you've been doing in communities all these years, how are you going to take that knowledge into your new job and your new work in philanthropy? And what are the lessons that you learned that will inform your work as a philanthropist moving forward?
So first off, I will follow your lead quite a bit, Doug. I mean, you, in all seriousness, when you brought up philanthropic colonialism the first time, I actually thought about going and getting a tattoo because I felt like I was, in my work with philanthropists, was constantly wrestling with that.
Yeah.
Of sort of their ideas versus what community members were actually telling us was needed. And it actually kind of gave me a life jacket at a point where I really needed it, because I was starting to wonder if this was even going to be possible to keep going, given all the pressures. What I would say is this, is that, that we in the philanthropic sector need to realize that communities themselves are best positioned to address their own community challenges, right? Communities themselves are best positioned to address their own community challenges. There is no Superman, going back to that documentary, Waiting for Superman. There is no silver bullet. Steve Ballmer actually the other day, who I now have the pleasure of working with, he and Connie, said there is no lightning bolt. What he has realized in his very short time in philanthropy is that there is no lightning bolt that we could go invest in and just make it happen. And he often refers to things as an air war versus a ground war.
Yeah.
And he said what he has realized is that economic mobility, which is what Ballmer Group is focused on, economic mobility is not an air war, right? An air war is something where you can just kind of fly in, drop something down, and we've made amazing progress. There are some things that we could do that would be great, that would be supportive, but in general, this work is a ground war, right? Where there are going to be all different kinds of interventions, all different kinds of ways of approaching things. And even what happens on the ground in this community is going to be different than what happens on the ground in this community. And the real tenets, though, that we care about are the community members actually, do they have a shared agreement on what the outcomes are? Do they actually have a shared understanding? And a lot of times, I know in Cincinnati when we started way back in 2005, everybody was saying the word education and making the assumption that we all had the same definition of what education was. And over time have had to evolve that definition to really just land on what's measurable, what could we actually achieve in that, right? And then number two, are communities actually using data, not just to admire the problem, but are you actually using data on the ground to inform action? So are philanthropists, are the local philanthropists, right, in partnership with national philanthropists, hopefully, actually looking at local data and saying this is what's needed, right? Like in Dayton, they looked at the data in their community around early childhood, and they saw that the African-American neighborhoods, predominantly African-American neighborhoods, had the lowest quality early child care centers, right? Rather than looking at it and being like, okay, that's terrible, and then going to whatever their plan originally was, they stopped what they were doing completely and said, we're going to focus on getting quality in the neighborhoods that don't have it, right? They totally changed what they were doing because they actually together looked at the data. The public and private funders were willing to say, you know what, we were headed over here. We need to now start going over here. They totally changed what they were doing based on that, right? And then last, are you actually engaging the public sector? If we don't have public sector dollars engaged in this work, and one of the handouts was all about public sector dollars being invested in new different ways, WIOA dollars and other dollars in this sector that are really critical. If you don't have that going on, then that's a real challenge. So I guess our take would be, and we're going to be ambassadors within the philanthropic sector, is to say, let's work with local communities as partners. Let's never release an RFP, right? I will consider success at Ballmer Group if we never release an RFP, right? And I don't know if you agree with that or not, but this idea that the best grant writers win rather than the best community organizers and community mobilizers and community advocates winning, I just think that's ridiculous, right? That to me is a shame. And so if we are able to just constantly push on being a true partner, we just want to model that, right? Back to another thing Karen said, let's just walk the talk. Let's model it. Let's do a lot of how you have partnered with people, and let's actually figure out what can solve some of our most complex problems.
But, Jeff, though, if we look at the philanthropic sector, philanthropy is moving away from place-based and moving away from community-based, right? National foundations are. And the word you always hear is, oh, it's just too much complexity, too much complexity at the local level, right? And complexity particularly when it comes to opportunity youth, right? I mean, these are kids who are at risk of criminalization. They have been pushed out of schools. There's difficulty, trying to build on-ramps. There's difficulty in terms of figuring out ways to build clear, coherent pathways, particularly for these youth. So I guess my question is, what would be your message to the philanthropic community, building upon what you just said about the importance of investing in communities, particularly at this time in our juncture? And what I mean by that is there's a lot of devolution when it comes to public dollars going to the local level. What's your advice to the philanthropic sector when they say, oh, well, the communities are too complex and this is too much of a complex issue?
I mean, what I would do first is send them the video of Langston Hughes' poem, right? And just remind them of the history and all the systemic barriers that we have created and some of the cultural challenges that Ruby, and I haven't seen that video, but I need to, is it a video or is it just it's an audio? I need to listen to that. I would just remind them that the complexity is rooted in a reality that we ourselves have built. And if we do not directly confront that reality, then we are kidding ourselves, right? That'd be the first thing I would do. I think the second thing I would do and hope to have are very, very concrete examples to show them of how you all in this room have addressed the complexity to improve an outcome. And I honestly will say that if we don't get that soon, if we don't have more examples very soon of us not just sharing how we've worked together to change a narrative, right, which is important, don't get me wrong, really important, that and work together to move a result, I think we're going to be fighting an uphill battle. I will say the only potential, and this is true silver lining that I'm doing right now, the only good thing I would say is that maybe we will stop as a result of where we are with this current administration. Maybe we will stop looking for national solutions. Maybe we will start actually looking in our own backyards and saying, you know what, let's just solve these, let's just address these issues ourselves, right? Let's just get it done. And I guess Bruce Katz, who many of you may know, is about to come out with a book called The New Localism, which is yet another jargony word to throw out there in our incredibly jargon-filled space that I have contributed to mightily. But I would say that is my hope, is that hopefully the philanthropic sector will see that we, quite frankly, don't have much of a choice, but to go back to community. And again, the Balmer Group will be a huge advocate for that.
Okay. Well, I do have one last question, and that's also related. One of the things we talked about with other philanthropic leaders is this notion of the foundations actually working much more in partnership with local communities around leveraging those public dollars, right? Around using every tool in the philanthropic toolkit to be able to do that. And it's interesting because a lot of foundations are not even aware of how to do that. Particularly when it comes to the limitations on lobbying that private foundations have. Many foundations have no idea that they can actually, do work under the IRS, which allows us to have conversations with policymakers and allows us to partner with non-for-profit organizations to leverage those public dollars. So I guess I'm wondering, what is it that you would say to philanthropy in terms of philanthropy themselves learning new tools about how to innovate and to be creative and to be thoughtful about how to do things in the way that allows us to support this new localism?
I would say to everybody here, when we're done, everybody ask Doug about the work that was led in California around criminal justice and how he got the Ford Foundation to invest in public policy work in ways that they, how long has Ford Foundation been around?
81 years.
81 years. They had never done anything even close to similar to that in 81 years. And I would say, again, we have to find examples of how people are doing that well. We were just with Ralph Smith, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, which I would say is kind of in a similar inflection point as this network, again, coming in as a sort of outsider. But Ralph was reflecting on the work of making connections when he was at Annie E. Casey Foundation. And he said one of the biggest failing forward moments in their work was that they did not engage with the local philanthropists, they did not engage with the local policymakers from day one. They engaged with them in year 7 of the 10 years, asking them to pick up what they as a national funder had done. And I would just say that to all my national philanthropic peers, don't ever do that. Let's find a way to actually partner and then break the mold and find examples of how philanthropies can do like what you did in California and what I believe others are realizing that they can do in order to have a voice in the public sphere that may not be lobbying, but that may be helping to change how people understand and see a given issue.
Okay. Well, I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. Thank you, Jeff. That was really great. Always a thoughtful conversation.
Thank you.
So let's open it up for questions.
Got Michael down there.
Oh, Michael, hi.
Hi, good morning.
Wait for the mic.
Good morning. Thank you for an incredible conversation. 2 quick questions, Jeff. One, on the planning process for the Strive Network to come up with the goals, how did you ensure that didn't turn into a year-long, 2-year-long process? What did you do to make sure that you actually got to those and didn't get caught in analysis? And then on the idea of never issuing another RFP, I have written a lot of RFPs, as has Steve Patrick. How do you make sure if you don't issue RFPs that you're not just funding the same folks over and over again that you already know that are in your network?
That's great. So on the first question, I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of what was called, I think it's still called results-based facilitation. It's a methodology that the Annie Casey Foundation over the last 25 years has tried to refine. And it's incredible, right? It is a competency that I would recommend anybody that is leading social change work try to employ. But one of their tenets is setting time boundaries on things. That's their jargony term for just set an artificial deadline and say you need to be done by this time, and then ask what is the process that the participants need to have in order to get there, right? So make sure there's agreement on that time boundary, on that artificial deadline, and then have them agree to what is the process they need to get there and what are the ground rules to making sure that you actually get to a decision. And I will tell you that all the different tools in their toolkit of results-based facilitation were used to make sure that that conversation was had as quickly as possible. The most important one was, again, reflecting what Karen said, and quite frankly, you all didn't even need to hear me because Karen pretty much said everything I've said. I'm just reiterating different language, which is that we were very transparent in the conversation about what the criteria were for selecting outcomes. And it was funny, we started with like 210 that people wanted. And then when you set outcomes, like we have to be able to collect it, right? We have to be able to collect it from a trusted source. It has to actually mean something to people, right? Like the number of people in international baccalaureate programs, not that many people care about that, quite frankly, right? Like maybe it's important, but not many people care. So we started to set these transparent, and as we filtered through the outcomes, everybody could very quickly see what was emerging as a result, and the time boundaries, the kind of process setting right at the outcome, and then being very transparent about how decisions were being made. That was great. Your second question was on the RFPs. This is where I think philanthropists have to work together very carefully. Last week we just actually had, Doug was in there, we had a conversation among some philanthropists, and a very poignant point was made that when you look at the map on almost every outcome that we care about related to economic mobility, and you do kind of a heat map, the Deep South is almost always the most red, right? And even when I look at the participants in this room, and I looked at the participants at the Strive Together convening, and I looked at the participants in other networks, there aren't that many people from the Deep South in the room, right? So we have to be super intentional about actively going out and finding partners who are doing amazing work, like Indianola, Mississippi, that is apparently crushing it. I need to go there and learn, right? Berea, Kentucky, I hear is crushing it. I need to go there and learn and actively pursue how we are beginning to go to places where there may not be the usual suspects.
You just brought up something that I thought, and I'm opening it up, but we're in a conversation here, so, which I think is so fascinating. And that is, we have a build program now at Forward, which is really focused on general support and core institutional strengthening. And Bridgespan did this great research for us. So they were asking all these questions, but they were looking at other foundations and how they do their investments. So the question was, what is the percentage of your grants that are general support grants? And if you look at the continuum, you'll find that more of the conservative foundations have up like 97%, 98% in terms of general support, and more of the progressive ones are on this scale, more of the 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%, meaning basically that a lot of the progressive foundations give a lot of project-based grants, which ties your hands and make sure that they're sort of telling you exactly what to do, as opposed to a general support grant that gives you much more flexibility. So I just think this whole riff of thinking about how we organize ourselves in terms of philanthropy, being very thoughtful about our geographic investments, but also thinking about how do we make investments so that we give as much flexibility as possible to grantees and communities.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that, and I would clap on that as well. Most of Ballmer Group's investments to date have been general operating support for that exact reason. I would say that what we need to say, I think, in the philanthropic sector and get agreement on in the social sector writ large, is that if we are more outcomes focused, getting back to sort of the trajectory of the network, heading towards more of an outcomes focused, what metrics are moving as a result of our collaborative efforts, that is sort of an accountability that we can hold in exchange for more flexibility. Right?
Yeah.
So if there is a sense, we're going to commit to moving these outcomes, we are also going to balance that with a willingness to for there to be real transparency about learning and failing forward. If that is present, that is what goes with more flexibility, and I would hope that the philanthropic sector will see that and then make more general operating support grants as a result.
Sounds good. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, Cheryl Davis from San Francisco. I really appreciated the conversation, or what you said about community having what it needs. I guess my question is, what's the rub or what's the ointment to thicken skin? Because I feel like when you talk about policy, when you talk about advocacy and you go to the community, a lot of times policymakers and service providers are not ready for the raw, angry emotion of community that actually pushes it, and so they don't go. So how do we get people to actually have those very difficult conversations, to put themselves in that space, to actually move the work? Because I think I hear over and over again that philanthropists and government keeps funding people that make them feel good about what they're doing and not actually funding the people that do the work and that will hold them accountable.
Yeah. So great question, and I don't have the answer, right? I just want to say that. I will say that one of my, I think probably most profound insights came from Ron Ferguson, who now does Boston Basics, but this was even before that, who does an amazing job, actually, if you've ever talked with him, of kind of outlining the history of grassroots organizing and community-based work, sort of the trajectory of it over time. And one of his insights is that if you are able to open up honest, and I'm paraphrasing here, and if you talk with him later and you say, was this right? Maybe he'll say no. So we'll just put this out there. But the way that I heard it and the way that I saw him live it is, if you are able to open yourself up to more raw, honest conversations around equity in particular, when it is done in the context of a result, when the work is done in the context of a result, rather than a concept that's solely based on perception and emotion. And that is all there, and it all matters, and it is all incredibly relevant. But it is when people have a discussion about we need to increase graduation rates from college of more opportunity youth. Here are the issues related to that are both systemic in nature, including systemic racism, right? And technical in nature, right? This is the whole landscape of the things that we need to be developed. Let's have an honest discussion around that, right? And let's hit on all these points and not let ourselves out of the bag of just talking about the technical stuff, which is what everybody wants to talk about, and not the adaptive things, right? But let's honestly have that. It opens up the ability to have a more honest conversation because it's about turning a curve. It's about us achieving something practical, tangible, that in the end we can all celebrate, and not just a battle of ideologies, which will happen and will play out, but much better to have that in the context of something that we all are trying to accomplish very tangibly together. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that hopefully creates a ground that's more fertile for those types of conversations.
In the back, yes.
Hi, I'm Catherine Morse. I'm with Samsung Austin Semiconductor in Austin, Texas. My friends from the Austin group have converted me to this movement. What's unique about Samsung in Austin is we have thousands, literally thousands of middle school jobs that don't require a college degree. And with the help of the Austin group, just this past week, we invited the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation in for a tour of Samsung along with some other nonprofits to provide skills. And now what we're doing is we're going out to all of the high schools, particularly some of the lower income high schools, and we're educating all of these counselors about the jobs that are available. And we are going to, this is a statement, by the way, I'm not a question, but I wanted to be encouraging, to talk about some things that are happening, that employers want to find good workers. We don't care where they come from. We don't care about we care about them, but we're not looking for any secret sauce. We want to go find young people, provide them with opportunities, and it's happening at Samsung, and it's really a beautiful thing. We're partnering with Goodwill. We brought in hurry up,
yeah.
A young man, but I want to tell you that, oh man, but anyway, what I want to leave everyone with this idea is go out and find the employers, go out and find the jobs, and connect the people to the jobs. And I really think that's what I want to leave everyone with.
And I would just reiterate that when my little straw poll of multiple communities, that when it came to opportunity youth work, one of the key pillars seemed to be effectively engaging employers in a meaningful way, not a surface way, not just to come one time to some sort of event, right, but to actually be engaged in the work as a partner to build those pathways. That is really what's powerful.
And not just a quick summer thing either.
Exactly.
Questions?
Last one.
Oh, we're at 0. Wow, that was quick. Right here.
Good morning, Adrienne Armstrong from San Francisco. You used air quotes around collective impact and a few other terms and mentioned that you had more thoughts on the language you were using. I was hoping you could share some of those thoughts.
We're actually out of time for sure now. It's great. No, so I listed the 5 things that I did not fail forward on, I just plain failed on in my work at Strive Together. There's a lot, so there were more than 5. But one of them was language, how we talk about this. I will tell you that Steve actually just did a speech. He did a keynote last week at the Strive Together convening, and it'll be available to everybody. And I actually thought it was pretty poignant because he not only said, I'm excited about this community-based work, you were there.
Yeah.
He actually also said, he gave a critique of it. And his number one thing was that he kind of gives up on the language right away. And as a result, as a business person, just tries to anchor himself in the data. So if you are having trouble engaging the employers or other folks that are not willing to wade through our language, the data and outcomes piece may help with that, but it doesn't solve our bigger problem of needing to come up with a language that everybody can understand. And I guess I'm just going to close out then, going back to, I think, right where Karen finished her comments, and maybe where I'm coming around on, is we the adults have been trying to talk about this, let's actually talk to the students. Let's actually talk to the youth. Let's actually talk to the parents. Let's have them describe what they need. I bet you our jargon was trying to say that all along, right? And we're kind of headed down a path where maybe we need to develop a new narrative around this work that's actually anchored in deep partnership with the people all along we've been intending to serve, and we in our sector just need to kind of get over ourselves, right? So with that, I will just say that we've got to figure it out, and I don't have all the answers, but I believe they exist in the communities where all of us are working, with the people that we may not have been listening to adequately enough all along.
Yeah, it's great. And I want to say one last thing on that. And that is, and I said this last week, remember, you either frame an issue or be framed. It's up to you. And I think these community voices and learning from young people is going to be so important.
And I want to thank you, Doug, while I have a chance on the stage, for all the work you've done to help make sure that we don't get framed and we actually have an opportunity to do some pretty profound work. So thank you for all you've done.
Thanks for everything you've done. Thanks. Great.
Wow. Okay, so as we transition, I'll just get Doug in trouble. I can't help myself. Because there was this great through line from Karen and Jeff about young people at the center of this movement. There are many young people in the room, and Jeff said we were crushing it on the youth engagement piece. Maybe some of the young people in the room might beg to differ. Feel free to tell Jeff. But here's the thing I'm going to do to get Doug in trouble on. He mentioned these kind of prestigious build grants at Ford that are multi-year. And, you know, the rule is you never announce a grant until it's done. But great news, Doug is really close to a new grant. Turn off the cameras. That actually is all about putting youth at the center of this work. So it's in partnership with Opportunity Youth United. Karen read OYU's piece, where we collectively as a network can really align around the youth-led change piece of this with OYU. And actually with Thaddeus and team on policy. Yeah, so don't tell Darren Walker that we outed Doug as having navigated that. It was really his brilliant strategery that got us to this place where, as this network moves forward, the anticipation is, assuming Darren doesn't cancel the grant now that I've mentioned it, the anticipation is there will be now resources to really leverage the youth-led piece of this work, where these two networks work in well, three networks, because it's also with Opportunity Youth Network around the policy change. We can work in symbiosis in a way going forward that I think many of you have been at the forefront of in the communities, elevating the voice of young people and now bringing them to the table in really authentic ways. So that's really cool. So I just couldn't help but notice that through line, Doug, sorry, and share the great news, even though it's premature. So stay tuned. Stay tuned, and we'll let you know when it's okay to thank the Ford Foundation for continuing to invest in the OY Opportunity Youth Forum going forward. Okay, last thing to close this out, let's ask the Forum for Community Solutions staff to please stand. Staff and senior fellows, please stand. And I just want to really acknowledge you guys. Thank you all. And if you haven't met some of our new team members, reach out, please, network folks. Okay, Monique, what do I have to do to close us out? Anything else? No. Please. Back here 11:45. Breakout sessions are next. Ask Jeff, what does it mean if you don't have an RFP between here and when he gets on the shuttle? Really awesome kickoff. Thanks everybody for being so engaged. Thank you, speakers. Onward.